So, alright, guys. Are you guys able to see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Oh, nice. So, as part of today's class, as part of table of contents, today class is content management and operations. Okay, and in the first 2 hours, we'll be covering content modeling best practices. Okay, and how we can organize AEM assets in the best possible manner. Okay, and then in the content workflows, what are the effective way of implementing the content workflows? Okay, these are the topics which we will be covering as part of the content modeling best practices and the AEM assets, content workflow, all these topics. Okay, so if you go to best practices for assets, we actually have it's a very important aspect to make sure the content speed or content velocity is as per the requirement of the brand. So if we have a brand, um, they are expecting the images to be loaded within 2 seconds or 3 seconds, or assets to be managed in such a manner that uh, easily identifiable, and there are a lot of assets which are actually theoretically being run as a scheduler, which will upload multiple assets which are having different mime types, and uh, all of this is happening on your project. So we need to have a best practices setup for the assets within our Adobe Experience Manage environment to make sure we reach the expected velocity for the content delivery, especially the assets delivery. Okay, so what actually the main features that are actually part of this asset processing is, first we will have asset ingestion. Okay, so the actual file, the asset, the image, the PDF, the document that being moved to AEM instance is asset ingestion. Then we will have rendition generation, so which means creating multiple responsive variations of that asset to make sure those assets are actually available for multiple different environments and end devices is rendition generation. And then how we can actually keep metadata in such a manner that we can actually enhance the stability and performance when there is huge load on the system. So that is another option called metadata extraction and managing the metadata. Okay, so all of this we can actually do as part of the guides which are mentioned here. Okay, and we also will be able to know the tools which can be used to manage and build the enterprise asset management system, basically the entire asset management system which is needed for our project in the asset tools which are mentioned below. So the first one is assets performance tuning guide. So it is a document which tells us the best practices that we need to follow as part of our implementation once we go live. So to ensure that the requirements are met. Okay. So if we go to assets performance tuning guide, so it actually gives us multiple parameters like the hardware considerations, the software considerations, also the network components, which all be part of the performance tuning process of the assets. Okay, based on our deployment scenario meaning how we are deploying the assets as a cloud or on-premise upload, all of that, we need to configure these hardware, software, and network connections to make sure the assets are actually being delivered properly without having any performance issues or performing bottlenecks. Okay. Apart from identifying the basic requirements for hardware, software, we'll also build a foundation for assets deployment to meet the scalability also, like three aspects: performance, scalability, and reliability. So scalability is having multiple load increase also be taken care from the Adobe Experience Manager. Reliability is it is consistent. We can see that the data integrity is there, and performance is it is also faster. Okay, so these things we can actually make sure. If any of them are performing poor, the interactive experience, like different end devices, how they are actually interacting as part of asset processing, download speed, all of that will be affected greatly. So we need to make sure the performance is actually up to the mark, and doing performance optimization should be the fundamental task uh, before we actually set any targets. That's what Adobe recommends. So make sure you have set up a performance optimization as the fundamental task. So first one is platform level. Okay, at a platform level, um, Adobe supports almost all the platforms. Okay, and most of the variations or documentations or exposure till now is actually with native tools on Linux and Windows. Okay, basically 64-bit operating system with a good or high memory for experience manager asset deployment is a good platform. Okay, and we need to always make sure tar mk is implemented, because that microkernel is scalable. Okay, CRX2, CRX1, they do not, they have issues if we directly use out of the box. So if we can actually implement RMK, um, it is better. And if we want to have scalability of multiple AEM tar MKs, since it is single instance, we can use Mongo MK. So this was one of the question yesterday when we wanted to have a lot of assets performance and all. How do we manage, right? We had an option like Mongo MK implementation with AEM as assets cloud service. So that was the reason, because for high scalability, Mongo MK will provide better option. Okay. So basically, temporary folder. What is temporary folder, which we will use as part of assets performance? Okay, to improve asset upload times. So basically, asset upload times, meaning uh, how much time it takes to upload the asset. Okay, to improve them. So the best option is if you can have a Java temporary directory. Okay, which can be used for the temporary storage for the export of the assets. That will actually help to make sure the assets are uploaded faster. Okay, so how do we approve the asset upload time? Okay, so the recommendation is on Linux or Windows, if there is a RAM drive or storage disk, And in cloud-based environment, an equal high-speed storage type, for example, EC2 or any drive, that can be used as a temporary folder, and the server has good enough memory. If we can run these commands like providing an 8 GB RAM drive. Okay, so we are actually RAM 8 GB we are mentioning, and we are creating a AEM temp directory. Okay, and then this temp directory is now we will be used for the asset upload option. Okay, once it is ready, we need to set the JVM parameter to Java IO temp directory. Okay, for input output operations from the Java side, the temp directory which you would like to use is mnt aem temp. Okay, this is for Linux, but in case of this one, Windows, in start.bat we have JVM ops. So JVM ops is actually the configurations which we can provide as part of uh, bin.start script. Okay, and that bin.start script can be edited in start.bat, and we can mention temp folder should be the one which we have created with ample memory. Okay, if we create that, then we have to configure data related to Java configuration. After temp folder is available, then we will go with the Java configuration. In terms of Java, what configurations we need to set for the JVM parameters? One is use concurrent mark sweep garbage collection. Okay. Use oak query limit in memory as 5 lakh. Query limit in memory. Okay. And query limit reads mention as 1 lakh. Okay. Update limit to 250 lakh, 2 lakh 50,000. Okay. Oak fast query size is true. So these are the JVM parameters which, if we mention, the Adobe Experience Manager instance will read them for better performance in terms of the Java usage for the temp directory as well as query execution. Since AEM uses in Lucene framework and the custom queries, for the query execution, we can use this. Okay. So data store. So you know that in AEM assets, in CRX Fixstart also, whenever we upload content, we will have data store and segment store, and also other node store, which are available for storing the data. Which is wherein data store is the user like mutable data. So in data store, we can actually make sure um how we can configure assets to have better performance. One is to separate the data store from the segment store. First thing, we need to make sure the mutable, immutable, or segment store data store is separated, so that we will have clear programs planned or executed for both of them. Okay.
One question.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is we need for on-prem,
Yes.
I guess.
Yes.
It's not, because above one Java configuration we cannot do in AMS cloud.
Exactly. This is already taken care in AMS cloud.
Okay.
And also AMS cloud performance configurations, there is one more last slide as part of the implementation which I'll cover as well in case of migration from prem to cloud. So what aspects will make sure the assets can be migrated better?
Okay. And one more question. If
Yeah.
you scroll to that SAR MK and Mongo MK,
Yeah.
that one,
Yeah.
it is mentioned that it is better than Mongo MK. So
One single
this line.
instance if it is single instance, but if you have multiple, then it doesn't.
Okay. It's only for
Single
okay.
singular.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So in case of data store configurations, first thing is we need to separate segment store from the data store. Okay. And then we need to use max cached binary size and cache size in MB. These are the two parameters which will maximize the performance. Okay. So max cached binary size should be the smallest file size that can be held in the cache. Okay. Max cached binary size. So the binaries max cached minimum is you are using the smallest one. Okay. And for the data store, the size of the memory to be cached, we will mention cache size in MB. Okay. So if you can put 2 to 10% of the total heap size for the cache size in MB. Suppose JVM you are giving 1 GB and 2 to 10% is 100 MB. If you give cache size in MB as 100 MB and also max cache binary size to the smallest possible, it will actually improve the data store configurations that will be part of asset storage management and improve the performance. So as an architect, we need to know these configurations. Otherwise, the performance we cannot analyze and solve. Okay, suppose we are seeing performance issues, and then we are seeing it is mostly because of assets that are being constantly uploaded, downloaded, rendered, and then we need to actually improve the performance. That was the task which is given to us. How do we do it? So basically, the way to go ahead is first we will go through the understanding what are the configurations which are provided for the asset services. Okay. Is there a temp folder created for managing the temp memory? Is there a JVM configurations for Java which are mentioned for providing the proper indexing help for the queries so that they can run faster? And then is the data store and segment store are separated and particular cache properties are set in such a manner that it will help um, the faster performance. So those things we need to know. And the second one after data storage, we need to configure the buffered image cache to the maximum size possible. Okay. So what is buffered image cache? Okay. When we are uploading huge amounts of assets like 1 lakh assets, 10 lakh assets, okay, that will actually create unexpected spikes in memory consumption, right? Suppose you just started even in the Windows also, if you migrate a huge folder, if you go to CPU, you can see huge spike in the consumption of memory, and sometimes if it is so used, the system gets stuck in normal operating systems. The same thing goes with the JVM also. It will go to out of memory errors. Okay. So to restrict those errors when there is unexpected spike in the memory consumption, we need to reduce the maximum size of the buffered image cache. Okay. So just let's think of an example where we have 5 GB heap provided for the JVM. Heap means the objects which are created as part of the execution of the tool or any process. It creates objects, right? That will be stored in the heap. Okay. And oak blob cache is 1 GB and document cache is 2 GB. Okay. So now, uh, how much buffered cache it will take is basically 1.25 GB is actually taken for the cache itself. Blob is 1 GB. If it is document cache GB is 2 GB, 2 to 10% if you consider it is 0.25, which will be like 1.25 GB is separated for cache part. And for the operations part, we have only 0.75 considering the total cache which is available is 2 GB out of the heap 5 GB. So If we can set that cache thing to less, then we will have more memory available for the unexpected high spikes. Buffered cache size, we can set it in the OSJ web console. In the config manager, we have CQ buffered image cache section, okay, where we can set the property max memory, okay, and then we can set it to 1 GB, okay. um, Instead of 2 GB, if we can set it for 1 GB, we can set. So from 6.1 service pack itself, Sling OSJ config node for configuring this, the data type should be long. Okay, this is a service pack fix which they have actually done for 6.1 SP1, wherein normally system console configurations are actually configured through Sling OSJ config, or you can put it as a service config. If it is a Sling OSJ config on the config which we are giving for the cached buffered size. Okay, is this clear? And the next one which we do is the data store should be shared. Okay, it's not like you can have isolated data stores which are actually uh, even a more blocker when there is unexpected hikes. To actually solve the issue, we have shared data store where we can actually save disk for increasing the number of throughput, meaning number of assets that can be at the same time concurrently can be uploaded. So these shared data store will help that purpose. And in shared data store, how many different data stores we have? Okay, one is S3 data store, and out of the box, Adobe supports blob data store configuration. And if you go to uh, Apache Jackrabbit Oak plugins blob data store, we have um, at least minimum kind of memory that is available. They are saying 12.8 terabytes of binary large objects. Okay, and we can see the configurations having access key, secret key, S3 bucket, S3 regions, endpoints, all of that. So having such a huge memory available for any data store is so much advantage, because the unexpected spikes which are having a lot of assets being pushed at the same time, and that is also short interval of time, it will help to AEM to take that huge hit in the first go if it has enough memory. And having S3 bucket data stores actually being used for the data store configuration is perfectly good, because it has huge memory already available. Okay, so this is about data store and memory configurations. We have gone through Java, JVM folder, and then we are actually going through network optimization. Okay, how we can actually optimize the network calls which are coming to the Adobe as part of asset optimization. Okay, so basically the recommendation is all network calls should be HTTPS, not HTTP. HTTPS is having SSL. HTTP will not have SSL. And the reason for recommending HTTPS is most of the firewalls does not accept data sniffing from HTTP. Firewalls, assets upload and those downloads cannot happen. Okay. Um, and for actually having large file uploads, it's always better to go through LAN. rather than Wi-Fi. Okay, it's very basic, but telling is again ensure that users have wired connections to the network because a Wi-Fi network becomes quickly saturated. Have LAN connected to the instance, whichever is working on bulk upload of the assets rather than Wi-Fi connected. Okay, so network affects this much about the asset performance because of the bandwidth available and the load on the experience manager. So if the bandwidth available is high or the load on the experience manager is low, the performance will be excellent. And if the bandwidth available is low and the load on experience manager is high, performance will be unimaginable. I mean, it's pathetic, right? So how do we can actually make sure to have the load balanced and bandwidth made available? So we need to gauge or get the instance type and make sure we have a sufficient network bandwidth like 2 Gbps, 10 Gbps, 200 Gbps based on the organization's enterprise um, the kind of amount of data that and also kind of amount of network bandwidth that is supported by the enterprise have as much as possible. And they're saying especially for experience manager hosted on AWS, this bandwidth is a concern, and we need to have more bandwidth, and that's the data from the experience of the Adobe Experience Manager uh, user, I mean the implementations by the Adobe. Okay, and if it is hosted on AWS, you will have flexible scaling policy, and it automatically upload, scale up, scale down based on the load. Okay, and the main things which are actually considered to be part of network up to network management is making sure as much as highest bandwidth possible, making sure users using wired connection than network, making sure HTTPS is enabled, and having AWS kind of platforms for asset hosting is very much beneficial because the policy which is available on the AWS for scale up and scale down is fast, dynamic, very flexible. Okay, that's what the recommendation. Okay, that is about assets performance guide. If you go to assets sizing guide, okay, so why do we actually use sizing for the assets? Okay, when we are actually doing an experience manager assets implementation, meaning asset uh, service for a brand, we need to know what kind of sizing or what kind of management we are using for assets in terms of disk space, CPU, memory, IO, network. I mean, how many concurrent requests are coming. So these are all we need to know about our brand assets solution requirement. Then we can actually have a perfect asset implementation can be done from the AEM or also from the DAM, so that we can actually have the solution available for the corresponding sizing. And it also helps on the cost side. If we actually use for a small implementation a high sizing, it is costly, and if it is a huge implementation, less sizing, it is very um, slow or lot of intermittent issues, and then not stable the implementation. So those are the considerations which we need to do as part of sizing. Okay. So while doing sizing, how do we know what size is the perfect size? And to know that, first things we need to know is how assets are actually moved to the system. Okay. How the assets are moved to the Adobe Experience Manager system. And the easiest and most primitive way of knowing is the size of existing library. If we divide the size of existing library by the age of the library, we can know at what rate assets are being created. Okay, you have 1 year old assets, and then you have 10 GB of the assets. So monthly you will know how many assets are created, or weekly you will know how many assets are created, or daily you will know how many assets are created. If you know how many assets are created daily, you know for like certain period, this much is the capacity which I'm expecting, and for this much is the capacity, we will know some disk space which is needed. Okay, first consideration is disk space. Okay, while considering the disk space, how data store will affect is when we are actually sizing a required disk space for implementation, uh, we do the calculations based on the size of images. It is not correct, because just the size of images will not only confirm how much total size will be needed, since I know the number of images. Because by default, you know, right, update dam asset workflow, which will create renditions, mobile, web, and desktop, the moment which we start uploading the assets, right? And they are also having a certain size, and they are also added to the existing image size, and it is almost like thrice the expectation of which we had done initially is the storage needed, right? So the way to identify is, it should not be like number of images and size of image calculation getting the data, it is wrong. Okay, sometimes some brands out of the box renditions are not sufficient, they'll create their own renditions also as part of their workflow, because there is multiple tools which are available for like Adobe InDesign, Adobe Illustrator, from where we can actually create multiple subassets, and then we can actually use them for renditions. Okay, also there is another point which will increase uh, the assets, single asset data itself is versioning of the asset. Suppose you have versioning implemented as part of your project, just you upload a asset, it created 3 out of the box renditions, 10 custom renditions, and all of them you have 2 versions. And imagine how a single image and size, uh, considering the number of images, will the memory size, disk size will be different if you consider the renditions and the versioning. But in case if you do not consider, how it will be, right? It will be very different. Okay, so we need to know how many versions we wanted to store in the system for a longer duration, basically at least for 2 weeks or 1 month or 6 months. I wanted to have the versions available for 6 months, 2 weeks, 1 month, because if I'd like to switch back, I need to have it. Maybe that's business requirement, right? So we need to consider all of this while calculating the accurate storage space. Okay. First, we need to determine the size and number of assets that are loaded into the system. Okay, each file size and number of those files, and we will also have renditions, we will also have versioning, and we will also uh, have the file types. Like each file type has a different kind of requirements for asset memory. One is like, suppose in
files itself, PSD, JPG, AI, PDF files, we will have multiple sample images of each file format. Okay, and they'll have different file sizes and complexities also. Okay, as we mentioned, renditions, single one, each file type, and also while creating the renditions, if we directly create the way which we want, the size might be higher. So Adobe supports certain applications which are very useful to create renditions which are responsive and also less in size. One is Image Magic, another one is Creative Cloud. So for creating out of the box renditions, please use these two options as recommendation by Adobe. That will help to have the sizing done properly for those renditions or versioned images of those uploaded assets. Okay, and we are creating any subassets, we need to have proper file types. Okay, and once these are created, we need to have a verification with the existing before upload original image size with the ones which we have created after renditions, after versioning, after subassets. Because if it is actually increasing, that means there is a mistake which we are doing in terms of creating rendition or anything. We need to optimize them. Okay, and you need to always know what is the growth factor of memory increase for your asset. You have 1 GB of assets you uploaded with renditions and subassets, the total size is 3 GB, so meaning the rendition growth factor is 3 times. Okay, suppose you have estimated like I'll be getting 3 GB of assets in the next week. With renditions it will be total 9 GB in the next week, so accordingly you need to have disk sizing planned. Okay, also you need to just from the business a basic understanding, uh, will the assets will be stored 1 year, 2 year, how many years or how many months, and after that I can delete permanently. So we need to know, otherwise they'll say each one is important, they wanted to keep forever. It can't be done, right? You can't keep things forever, keeping adding things and even not using them and still be in the memory. Make sure the memory size is very more costly and speed is affected as well. Okay, and make sure the how frequent the images are being edited. If it is high, um, make sure the finished assets are uploaded rather than editing the images in the AIM itself. Okay, we will give you a recommendation to marketing team, boss. Why don't you just edit it everything outside AIM and upload to AIM, rather than you bring the asset to AIM and try to edit it here and then try to save it and then try to use it for the content delivery, because those operations can be externally done to AIM and AIM performance will be not taken, our memory will not be taken for those operations, which is ideally not needed also to be done inside the AEM. Okay, and we will also know age of the oldest asset to calculate uh, each month how many number of assets are actually being incurred. So by making sure how much we are getting, how much is the growth factor, how much is the editing of the changes and all of that, we will get to know how much is the sizes of the assets that will be loaded, how much is the number of assets, growth factor for the rendition, and per month how many modifications we are doing, and then we are how many versions we are maintaining, and then how many new assets that are being loaded each month, and year of growth for storage space, like each year how much growth for the storage we need to provide. Okay, that will create a spreadsheet for us where we can use it for network sizing spreadsheet to actually determine the total space needed for data store. Okay, so here we are actually had a file where it will show raw images being loaded 1 TB and the repository size by the factor of 15 GB. Imagine. So that is one of the example which they have done, which they said, um, how certain images sizes are actually needed for the implementation, and data store is actually increased to that level. So the reason for so these are the calculations. If you can do, you'll get to know understanding of that better. So assets and renditions, versions growth, average raw asset size, total space needed for data store. Okay. Size of raw assets, number of assets to load, number of assets modifications per month, number of months to keep the versions, number of new assets to load each month. So if you do a such kind of calculation data sheet, you will be easily be able to get to know the sizing done properly. Okay. uh, and you can also use shared data store as part of large data stores to identify how much is the disk space needed. Like it can be shared by primary and standby author instance, and also it can be shared between different data store between author and publish also during replication. So these things we can do. Okay. And if you have a shared data store, single point of failure will not be there. Oh, sorry. It is introduced because only one data store, which is shared between multiple instances. If it is failed, it is an issue. So business continuity will be an issue. So we need to have a proper backup plan. Okay. And yeah. Next is after data store. Next one is node store or document store. Okay. These are basically kind of generated data from the AEM out of the box, not which is added by the marketing team. How do you manage node store and document store? Basically in disk sizing for assets, we can actually use asset metadata, asset versions, audit logs, archived and active workflows. Okay. If we can know the amount of data consumed by these four things, we can easily understand the sizing better. Okay. Because if the binaries are stored data store, most repository the size is below 100 GB. Okay. There is 1 TB size data stores also there. Okay. For having so offline compaction, online compaction, you guys might be know, right? We will actually upload, make sure the size of the repository is effective for the custom duration. Meaning all the CRUD operations which are performed on the repository will increase the memory continuously, and then data also. Effective state of the repository will get as part of compaction. Effective state means final data, and then you can apply yeah. So how much you can have size of the disk as part of the repository? There is a rule of thumb is 1.5 times the size of expected repository. Okay. So for that also they have provided a sizing based on the node store. We have done the data store, then node store. Okay. So then that is what part of disk sizing. Okay. Then network sizing. Okay. In case of network sizing, we have multiple limitations. Like suppose a network have a fast server, but the connection is not large enough to support the load of the users who are uploaded. So you have got a good CPU, fastest CPU, but the Wi-Fi is not supporting enough bandwidth for the 100 or 1000 users. Uploading or downloading the assets from the system is very slow. Okay. How do you know whether the user's network is choked at experience manager or not? We have a clear network topology clarified for based on different implementations. Okay. So the network conditions are clearly mentioned here. Okay.
See, if you see this is the diagram. 48 Mbps Wi-Fi access point, 100 Mbps VPN link, 1 Mbps internet, 15 Mbps 1 Gbps core VPN. Okay, so they are mentioning corporate network and also individual network. Okay, client connecting to the corporate network, these are the minimum, and the corporate network, these are expectations. And then corporate network to uplink the internet, then this is the VPN. Okay, so the speed considerations are clearly mentioned. At least 1 Gbps has to come to the author. Okay, if anyone asks how much speed I need to have 1 Gbps if possible. That will help. Gbps is not capital B, small b. So guys, just right, capital B, small b differences. So this is the network speed you would need to have for having that implementation of the network sizing. Okay, so there are certain limitations while implementing the sizing we need to keep in mind. Okay, um, so one of them is file size is not the only factor that creates out of memory issues. Okay, the dimensions also will create out of memory issues, because when we start the experience manager, it uses higher heap size, and then the image handler will actually have a certain limitation for the image dimension. And if it is actually apart from that more, then not just the size, the image uh, dimension also can affect. And for that you need to have the threshold property updated at this location, standard image handler component in the configuration manager, to use intermediary temporary file greater than 0. Okay, and also there is a calculation of number of assets. Okay, so by default 2.1 billion, meaning almost 210 crore. Okay, 210 crore uh, is supported as part of file system assets in data store. If you have proper memory, network, bandwidth, disk, everything is available. Out of the box 2.1 billion is the kind of files that can be stored. Okay, if we can have different renditions incorrectly generated, and all of them, the longest side of image should not be greater than 65,000 pixels. Okay, any asset where the any dimension is greater than 65,000, it might create out of memory issue. Okay, this is also something which we might not know till now. Apart from file size, file dimension is also sometimes issue. If you have 65,000 pixel more than image tried to upload in any of the AEM instance, it might get out of memory issue. Okay, and a single file size out of the box 255 MB, one time it can uh, process, but at the same time you cannot guarantee a 18 MB file can be managed, because one of the image is having higher number of pixel compared to the previous. So the combination is the one which gives you idea if it is actually having um, bare minimum pixel dimensions and you're trying to upload one time itself. 255 MB can be managed. At the same time 18 MB it gets struggle to manage. Reason being 18 MB has a dimensions which is so high compared to 255 dimensions, and that's why it's struggling to manage the API. Okay, so that is how we can actually do the asset sizing. Okay, so we have understood asset performance and asset sizing, and then we have other things as well. Asset migration guide and asset network consideration guide and asset monitoring guide, experience my best practice, creative cloud best practice. So we'll go take a small break and then we'll come to the monitoring guide. Okay, and then we will also cover the migration guide and network considerations guide. Okay, we'll take a small break and we'll come back. Thank you. We'll connect back at 10:15.